The evidence in the early centuries is this. It is first of the manuscripts, because the traditional text from the later part of the 4th century prevailed almost everywhere, and there were after that time hardly any of the others. Supposing it was general, almost universal, everywhere found to prevail, it must have been the successor of copies of the same character which went before it. Therefore, the manuscripts throw back their character to the earliest age. Secondly, there is the evidence of the Fathers, which I have in our first volume gone through, and have shown that by a very large majority they witness to the traditional text. With respect to this subject, I must point out that those who maintain B and Aleph have a very much more difficult task to perform than we have. We admit that readings of their character go back to the first, but we call them corruptions. We admit they were quite as early and came out immediately after, perhaps even before, the Gospels were written. But our opponents say that our readings do not go back at all. Therefore, we have simply to prove that our readings go back to that time. In order to show that those who are opposed to us are wrong in giving a late date to the traditional text. Then, thirdly, there are the versions, and of those first comes the Peshitta. With respect to the controversy about the Peshitta, whether that or the Curtonian was the old Syriac version or not, a great deal of evidence will be given to you by those who have expressly studied the subject. One point I notice, which has for me a good deal of interest, by the time of the 6th century, the apparatus of manuscripts of the Peshitta exceeded the apparatus of the Greek manuscripts of the Gospels. Does not that show how very firmly the Peshitta must have been settled? What is settled in the unchangeable East goes on, and accordingly that seems to be a strong argument, as well as the others, in favor of the early existence of the Peshitta. Next, I take the question relating to the revision of the traditional text. The Latin versions, according to my figures, witness in favor of the traditional text in the proportion of 5-4. You will see here the exclusiveness of Dr. Hort, and I venture to hope the greater broadness of our school. There is one point which perhaps I may be allowed to enter upon before I end. It is this. Dr. Hort's system stands, of course, in our way, and I think there are very great objections to it. The first, perhaps, that one might notice, which is felt by many people very strongly, is that in order to support it, he is obliged to suppose that certain revisions took place of which there is no trace whatever in history. I do not wish to dilate upon that now, but I know there are some, and perhaps several here, who feel that is a very strong point. Possibly I may mention a little private instance of this. A few years ago at Bournemouth, a friend of mine introduced me to the late Dr. Scott, headmaster of Westminster School, who divided the honors at Cambridge in his year with the present distinguished Bishop of Durham. He said, "If you get Scott upon the phantom revisions, as we call them, it will delight your soul." He called upon me, and I introduced the subject. It was like turning on a tap. He was thoroughly indignant at the liberty taken with history by Dr. Hort. I only mention this to show you what is thought by very able men who are quite capable of judging of history, if they are not actually experts upon this subject. There is another point, that of conflation. I want particularly to mention this. It has been said in the life of Dr. Hort that he would not reply to Dean Burgon because he thought that Dean Burgon did not know enough to grapple with and estimate his inductive theory. I have my doubts, but I will not say anything about whether Dean Burgon had not examined more Greek manuscripts and had a greater command of patristic quotations than Dr. Hort. Our contention is that Dr. Hort's theory is an inductive theory without induction. As a matter of fact, there has been no inductive foundation published. It now remains in pigeonholes or manuscript books, and the world has not seen it. But I also hold that it is not supported by any induction adequate to the maintenance of it. Now, conflation supplies a field small enough to test this in. Dr. Hort, I speak very briefly, having no time to pay tribute to his many admirable qualities, only brings forward 8 instances, unless perhaps there is one more mentioned just on his way. 8 instances to establish a system which is supposed to operate throughout the whole of the Gospels. I say that is an absurd induction, but I have answered his 8 pleas, and in the opinion of one of my critics have had the best of the argument. That, however, may pass. 8 instances, 4 from St. Mark, 4 from St. Luke, none from Matthew, unless it is the one I have just noticed, and none from St. John. Yet St. John especially is just the writer whom you would have thought would have supplied several such, his writings being quite of the character required. I say that this is an absurd foundation upon which to build upon a large doctrine. I tried my best to increase Dr. Hort's number, and I added 24 to it, so as to make 8 for each gospel. All these but one answered the conditions at first, but failed in meeting the requirements afterwards. It is quite possible that I have made a mistake and have been unable to discover what really exists. I am quite prepared to suppose that there may be several. A friend of mine showed me 7 which he had found out, where, curiously enough, whilst 5 of these conflations were towards the traditional text, the others were towards B or Aleph, and therefore in the wrong direction. In order to satisfy the conditions of this problem, it would be necessary to have at least 30 instances, and these should be typical instances. I give a challenge here to the followers of Dr. Hort, either to produce 30 typical instances or to reject the system altogether. Just in conclusion, let me say that although in principle there can be no compromise between idolatry of B and Aleph and an adherence to a broad view of evidence, nevertheless, although no theoretical compromise is possible, I should hope that there may be a practical meeting in many ways. And what I should hope very much is that some plan may be set on foot from this time by which those who are on different sides of this question may find some sort of agreement and may cooperate one with another in threshing out this great question. It is with that wish that I have done what I could in this debate, proposed to me kindly by the Margaret Professor. I have to thank you all for the attention you have given me, and I only hope some good result may come of our meeting together today. Okay, Lord willing, I will continue with Professor Sanday in the next video.